Hey guys, so I am back from the NAWCQ. It's a whole lot of fun. I'll work on the vlog whenever I have the chance, but in the meantime, I really wanted to do a top cut breakdown of the most played hand traps and staples because we are in a new format with Infinite Forbidden. A lot of things have changed and really look forward to also your guys' input in terms of, which hand traps and staples you think are really good for this format. Anyways, before we continue, obviously go check out those discount codes for Yu-Gi-Oh! Singles, supplies, and what have you. Links in description code below. Also, definitely go check out YGOProDeck.com. Really makes my job a whole lot easier to be able to go through all the deck lists, the topping deck list, and you can find a lot of information on the meta there. Now, in terms of the top 64 at the NAWCQ, this is a pie chart created by the Carlunchy store that you should check out. So, Fiendsmith Snake Eye, of course, not surprisingly, was the most popular and the most dominant deck. But I guess maybe one could argue it wasn't as dominant as maybe some would have thought. Of course, half the pie chart, it's still a whole lot, don't get me wrong, but I guess our expectations have kind of changed over the last couple of months. Tenpai and Yubel have really shown to be very strong as well. You had some Runic Stun, which has been a pretty popular choice the last few months because of how cheap it is to combat the current meta, Ritual Beast, Game Expert, all decks that recently got support, showing that they are able to top very high level events such as NAWCQ and several other decks as well. So in terms of the hand trap overview, in the main deck, it ranged from 0 to 21 and a median of 15 hand traps. So technically, if you compare it to last month, the trend has kind of gone up, but realistically, if you looked at a month before that, it was actually around 15 even then as well. So you know what, realistically, the last couple months, we've been in a very high hand trap count, and this is even accounting for the fact that, in terms of the deck size, it's not like a bunch of people are playing 60 cards or whatever that you saw in the YCS Charlotte days back in May 2022, where that was why you had a lot of hand traps being played, purely in terms of absolute numbers because the deck size was so big. But nowadays it's just still around 40, but it's just that non-engine space is like 20 essentially at this point. In the side, it also went up a little bit in terms of 4, and we're also going to talk about that new card from Infinite Forbidden, Molchami Prolia, which did see some pretty good side deck play. As for the going second, board breakers, of course, if you are putting in a lot of hand traps, then something has to kind of decrease. The board breaker wise, at least in the main deck, it was around 3, hasn't gone up, but in the side has gone down a little bit compared to the last month. And again, because we do still have some hand traps being played, and also not to mention, I should maybe do a separate section on floodgates. But for example, the rise of floodgates in the side has also gone up, which means perhaps, the board breaker count goes down because you do only have 15 cards for the side. So as usual, let's cover the most common hand traps played at the NAWCQ, and hopefully this helps you prepare for upcoming events. This weekend, Ash was still number 1. It's the most generic, and when you're playing, and when most of the top decks have so much space to play non-engine, Ash is just kind of going to be thrown in there. Honestly, against something like Tenpai on Common can still be pretty strong, and Yubel, I guess, Secta Lotus. Against Snake Eyes, probably not enough, but you know what, there was also a brand that did top, which Ash can be very strong against, but realistically, it's just generic and good and worthwhile having. And you can say the same thing for Imperm. Their effect negation is very popular right now. Imperm, Veiler, as well as Ghost Mourner, all really popular. And you also have Nibiru, which realistically is probably more so for the Snake Eye part. But you know what? Honestly, if you play Fiendsmith Snake Eye, let me know if the whole Fiendsmith part changes the way in terms of how well you can play through or around Nibiru. Because obviously, some other decks, let's say like Tenpai Dragons, we already knew this entire time Nibiru is just not going to be very good against them. Yubel, they likely have Phantom Yubel set up to prevent getting nibbed as well. And you know what, so it's probably not great against some of the top decks out there, but still worthwhile playing, obviously. And Droll, this is one that is definitely something, especially in a format, or rather in an event like NAWCQ, where the Infinite Forbidden set came legal the day before. Not a whole lot of time for testing for most players too, right? And so I think when you kind of by default, or rather as a precaution, a lot of times when you just sort of expect Droll will probably be very good, you just kind of throw it in there, and then usually you kind of see it in the next couple events after the play of Droll kind of tends to decline, usually trend wise, at least from the times that I've done it. But Droll, obviously with the Fiendsmith stuff being so popular in not just Snake Eye, but there's like, let's say, even Fiendsmith Labyrinth and Fiendsmith Yubel, Fiendsmith, I don't know, whatever. So Droll, I definitely noticed this myself playing at the NAWCQ, especially game 1. You just kind of have to respect Droll, and as a branded player, usually Droll isn't devastating, but there are times where it can really screw you in. And as a precaution, I did definitely play around Droll as best as I could, even in game 1. And then Bestial, Magnemite, I usually kind of use it as a representation of Bestials in general, but this time I decided to just sort of split it up because I was noticing, for example, Tenpai players, they are going to play Magnemite, but they may not necessarily play the other Bystials like Druid Swarm because Magnemite just searches a dragon for them for the follow-up. So it's kind of nice. Mostly seeing main deck play, and I can say the same for the Droll as well. So definitely watch out for that in game 1 situations. And then you do have Veiler. I kind of talked about this in the effect negation kind of thing. And you know what? If it was played, it was just main deck. So definitely not something you kind of bother siding with if you're going to play it. It looks like they're all maining it, similar to how you see with Imperm. I mentioned about Bystials. Druid Swarm is something that, you know, as a side deck option, definitely seeing a pretty good amount of play. But actually pretty good main deck play as well. I guess it's still worthwhile having. I guess with, let's say, like banishing like the IP or whatever can come up against Yubel. I mean, I guess there are several targets. It's not absolutely devastating. And I guess with, you know what, Gimmick Puppet, FTK, a couple did top. And from what I was told, Bystials can still be pretty strong, especially because when they have the field spell, you know, anything on the field, like you're just going to have a really hard time hand trapping, right? And then next we have the new very impactful hand trap in Molcharmy Purlia. So this is, of course, kind of like the quote-unquote new Maxi until we actually got the new real Maxi announced that's coming in Rage of the Abyss. So that one is definitely going to be much, much better. But for the time being, we have this one, and it's still quite good. And it was still seeing decent amount of play, more so in the side deck compared to the main deck, it seems. Also, the thing I don't like about this is that you can actually stack the Purlia, or rather Molcharmy effect. So for the time being, we obviously only have this one, and honestly you can actually, if you draw 2, you can do both, because you can only activate one other Molcharmy effect for the rest of your turn, including in itself. So you know what, if whether you have 2 of this, or let's say this and the other one, you can use both. So it can be pretty strong and stay stacked to draw. So really insane when you're going second. You do have Shifter, decent amount of play. Obviously you didn't see any kind of Thunder top, or I'm not even sure Cashier top, I can't remember that one. But realistically, let's say you have something like Ritual Beast, they can play this very, very well, and Tenpai Dragons tend to side deck this card as well. And then lastly, you have Ghost Mourner, which, as I mentioned, in terms of effect negation, but you know what, in terms of time card, because of its ability to burn as well, that can, I think, kind of come up a little bit more nowadays, especially because Fiendsmith, they tend to take quite a while in terms of their combos, and not to mention, I'm not sure why Konami decided to give them a burn condition as well, made it pretty frustrating in time situations, at least for me and some of my friends as well. Then we have Ghost Ogre, which at least among the profiles I've done, I remember at least one of the players saying this didn't seem as good as they maybe would have hoped. Obviously, in terms of like Tenpai Dragons, you know, if they have to use the field spell, it's great. You also have Yubel, where there's a lot of things that you can hit with this one. And I guess you have something like, let's say, Voiceless Voice. That play has definitely really gone downhill very drastically, which Ghost Ogre was pretty good against them at the time they were meta, at least. And I don't know, I guess, let's say with the Gimmick Puppet field spell, I'm guessing it would also come up as well. And then you have something like DD Crow. At this point, you know, most of the topping deck lists were not playing it, at least among the ones that were available. I should have noted that at the beginning. There were 46 deck lists that were available at the time that I collected the data. Thanks again to YGOProDeck.com. Phantasmic, this one was interesting because I'm assuming it's maybe played in conjunction with the Purlia, so that, you know, you can draw a Phantasmic into it, and then, you know, get to draw a little bit more and fix your hand a little bit more. Obviously, if you start with Phantasmic and then draw the Purlia, you're not going to be able to use that because you have to control no cards unless your opponent happens to get rid of your Phantasmic. And you know what? The Phantasmic targeting protection is actually pretty nice as well, and something that can be easily forgotten. You also have Ghost Mourner, Dogwood. This is obviously not a great card to see when your opponent plays this on you, and you know, it's kind of frustrating because of the time rules that this card can just completely instantly make you lose, because it's either you commit, you know, summon a lot of monsters and your opponent just wins in time because of the life points, or you just cannot really commit and you just kind of pass and then they just end up killing you anyways. So you know, this is at the time when I used to play during tier 0 format with tier lists, definitely like the most by far favorite card to draw post side, but definitely really frustrating if you're on the other end. And then lastly, you had Ghost Spell. Really didn't see that much play. I mean, technically it is pretty generic. It usually ends up hitting most decks in any format. Not as much as Ash, of course, but realistically, there's just so many hand traps and board breakers that you can play. You can't really fit all of them, so I guess that's why you didn't see as much play for Bell. And moving on to the most common side deck staples, we have, starting with Cosmic Cyclone. Although, keep in mind, you know, the most common side deck staple, it was 24 out of the 46 available list, right? So that essentially means that there wasn't actually a whole lot of consensus in terms of, you know, which staples that you should all play. There was actually pretty spread out because, but you know what, Cosmic is very good, right? You have something like Tenpai Dragons, the field spell, anything with field spell, really nice. Yubel, very, very problematic back row cards that you can get rid of as well. And so definitely comes up a lot going first and second. Crossout is definitely popular, especially at YCS level events and higher, compared to something like regional level, for example, just because you're going to expect a lot of mirror matches, especially among the top tier players, and so Crossout goes really hard beyond just the fact of stopping hand traps. And then you have Feather Duster, nothing really new there, just back row hate. Skill Drain, this is something we really don't want to see. Very, very, very strong, and they can just, even with like Fiendsmith stuff, they can just keep bringing back beaters, you know, honestly, on their skill drain. So this card, I hope, really finally goes when that balance drops End of Artist. And then you also have Droplet. This has been pretty popular, especially in the last couple of months. You know, it's just very, very flexible going first, going second, and just being able to discard some cards might end up being pretty useful, especially against, let's say, some decks that are playing Fiendsmith stuff for that Mayakashi lock. I'm not sure how common that actually is going to be among some of the different decks, but you know what, if you hard draw it, this also provides a flexible option to get that into the graveyard, or let's say even transaction rollback too if you hard draw it. Call by the Grave, nothing too special there. Same with Talents. I guess you could argue maybe Talents actually saw a bit of a decline in play compared to the last time, in terms of at least relatively speaking, but still it is a very hand trap heavy format, and this is going to come up. D-Barrier is another one that was going to be popular because it's just good against Tenpai, Synchro. You have something like Branded Fusion, which of course Branded didn't actually do very well at this event. But then let's say even with the Fiendsmith Snake Eye, you know, with the Fiendsmith stuff, if you call Fusion, at least it actually still, I believe, at least from what I'm told, pretty impactful, or can be rather. So you know what, I think it's still pretty solid right now. Dark Ruler, I think, ideally, you would think it would be very good, but because Desiree has a way to kind of play around it and negate the Dark Ruler, I guess that's why it didn't see as much play. I was personally citing a couple copies of this, and honestly, it didn't really come up as much in terms of being actually useful for me against some of the matchups that I've had. And then Lightning Storm, I think this is actually pretty solid as well, but you know what, for the time being, I wasn't seeing as predominant play. And then moving on, we have Rivalry. Honestly, if you're a deck that can play this, you're probably main decking it, because whether you're going first or second, you can be pretty impactful against something like Snake Eye and several other different decks in the format right now. It is at 1, possibly something that maybe Konami starts banning as well. I mean, you know, they did ban Summon Limit. It's not completely out of the question at this point, although if they hit this, they probably eventually will also have to hit, like, There Can Be Only One, Goes in Match, even though they're not as impactful right now, but you know what, it might actually get there, who knows. Blackout Labs, this one's kind of cool, and the fact that it was seen in like 8 of the 46 topping lists, pretty interesting. I definitely got this hit on me, and then I couldn't gimmick luck anymore, so you know what, it was really cool tech, and I love to see it, and it's technically, I guess, like a branded card in terms of artwork. You do have Thrust, nothing too special about this one. You know, you also have something like D-Barrier rolling around, of course, and kind of nice to have that. And then Evenly Match, I was almost a little bit surprised. I thought Evenly Match, honestly, is really good. Obviously, right now, with the Fiendsmith Snake Eye boards, they have a way to negate it. If you are able to go through that, though, I think Evenly can still be pretty punishing. Like for me, in my list, I was actually main decking 1 Evenly just because branded list. Main deck 3 Thrust anyways, and honestly, it really came up a lot, especially as you saw some stun decks top, and you know, I actually faced like at 1.3 stun decks in a row, and Evenly Match main deck just came out really clutch. So I think it's very nice, and definitely stay tuned for my vlog as well. You also have Anti-Spell. Hopefully this gets banned for sure. I don't know why they put it to 1 and then Summon Limit banned on the same list. Might as well just get rid of all of them. Really not worth, or rather just not good for the game to have this. Lastly, in terms of tech choices, this is a Floodgate. I haven't really seen that much play before. This was actually in the Ancient Gear deck profile that I provided on my channel. You would have seen Corbin on the feature match, and also he did make day 2, which is really impressive with Ancient Gears in this time. So neither player can special summon monsters with 1,000 or less attack. Basically, it's there for essentially like Snake Eye decks, right? So I mean, you know what? Depending on what kind of deck that you play, if this doesn't affect you, I guess that's another Floodgate that you can add to your arsenal. And then you have another Floodgate. This was seen in more of a stun list, and I always like seeing some of the new techs in stun decks. Not that I love stun decks or anything, I think they're awful, but I do find it pretty funny whenever they come up with a new trap card to play just to piss people off. This one, tribute 2 monsters. Effects of effect monsters that activate in the hand or on the field cannot be activated. That is actually pretty strong in this current format. I don't actually know how you have 2 monsters tribute. I didn't actually see the overall deck list in this stun list, so definitely I should check that out after this one. And lastly, this is obviously not anything new in terms of text, but I did notice only one Tenpai list that did top. They did play this. You know, the play of this has gone down a lot. This was very popular during the initial cashier format when they were tier 1, essentially over, you know, like a year and a half ago at this point. So I don't know. I guess the play of this has really gone down, but maybe it's worthwhile considering if you are playing any kind of going second deck. Anyways, guys, that was it for the breakdown of the top cut in NAWCQ. Hopefully this was helpful in helping you prepare your list for any upcoming events. I had a blast at the NAWCQ, and it was really great seeing a lot of you there. I really had a lot of fun, and you know what, I actually did pretty well, at least compared to what I thought I would. I ended up 6-2 heading into the final round in day 1, which meant if I won that, I would have advanced to day 2, but I did get knocked out by my good friend Murat, who ended up finishing top 16 at the NAWCQ. So you know what, I'm very happy with that story myself. But anyways, huge thanks to all of you for watching. Big thanks to my patrons and sponsors for the continued support, and well, take care, guys.